All right, it's 3 o'clock. Time to call the meeting of the Urban Design Commission to order for June 24th. Item number 1, roll. George McQuistion here. Brian Fitzsimmons. Betsy Brenstetter. Donna Cervantes. Jorge Charnica. Matt Guillory. Here. John Robeson. Ben Sellers. Here. Jeff Struble. Here. Okay, we have quorum. Item 2, approval of the minutes. If there are no objections, we will consider the minutes to be approved by unanimous consent. Next item on the agenda, number 5, consent dockets. A note, anyone may request individual consideration of a consent item. We have one item, 5A, on the docket. Does anyone request this be pulled? Is anyone here to speak on item 5A? We are. Okay, thank you. Thank you, Sam.
Yeah, this is an item that we had a lot of debate about last month. I know it was continued over. I'd like to see it pulled from consent, please.
Okay. At that request, we will pull it, and just as last time, we will consider it immediately for individual consideration. So, 607 Northwest 28th Street.
This is an item that was continued from your last meeting in May. At that meeting, you may recall there were comments from some surrounding property owners and residents that were concerned about lack of parking, and they were concerned about the design treatment of the west facade of the west building as well, and the height of that building as well. There were also concerns voiced from the commission regarding access and the location of the trash enclosure. The applicant has taken time since that last meeting to make some revisions to the project to try and address those concerns. Most notably, the trash enclosure has been relocated to the west side of the internal driveway near the alley, and the reason that's important is because they've reversed the traffic flow through the middle of the site so that a trash collection truck can enter from Dewey through the alley and then exit onto 28th and pick up that trash in that manner. They've also worked to provide a little bit better pedestrian connection between the east and west buildings at the north end of the site. And they have also revised the design of the facade of the west building, the west elevation of that building, to incorporate some more relief than you saw in the previous iteration of the project. And that completes our presentation. We're recommending approval. It's on a consent docket, and we're prepared to respond to any questions the commission may have.
Okay. Actually, John, just to let you know, the item 5A that was on the consent docket, 607 Northwest 28th in the Paseo, we had a request to move it for individual consideration, so we're discussing it now. Were there any particular questions from the commission about this? Maybe we should just run through, Sam, if you don't mind, the changes you made. And let me ask again, I apologize. I saw some people walk in late. Is anyone here to speak on this particular item in the audience? No. Okay, thank you. Sorry, Sam.
I have some exhibits here. This is the house next door. I wanted to pass these out, if that's all right.
Sure, of course.
That's the east facade of the house that abuts this project on the west building. Previously, we did have an offset in the building. I don't think the owner of that house understood that. The offset, you can see in site plan, there's a step back in the site. There you go, Michael. Hold on. It's a step back in the back, the west facade of that building. Since then, we've added an additional. We've stepped it down. It's roughly 12 feet tall in the back and stair-stepped. The portion adjacent to, as you can see in that elevation there, it's the right-hand side of the elevation. That's west elevation for the studios. That's basically 12 feet. It's 11 feet 9, actually. It steps back only about 4 feet at the top, but it does step back and offer some relief. There is a 21-foot screen wall that faces the street, but right behind that, you can see how narrow it is the tile roof, that little tile mansard there, and then those clear-story windows that are at the top. These are the changes we've made. The photograph that I gave you was of the house next door, and that was the protesters' main concern, although, strangely, most of the windows in that house, that window, two-thirds of that side is a blind wall with no windows at all. Our building does drop down the grade. We do have a 6-foot grade change on that building. We have some similar grade changes, as John Robinson knows, on the facade on Dewey Street as well. But so this one doesn't really present as dramatic a facade, we'll say, against the side of the building because it's dropping as it goes to the back. So the 21 feet is the parapet height. We added and maintained that parapet at the face on the 28th Street side, but immediately behind that, and for the first 36 feet, there's a step down to 12 feet. And that portion has a 4-foot offset. Then it rises back up to 19 feet. So.
Okay, thank you. John, John, did you have any questions about this? I don't mean to put you on the spot, but given that you're the representative from the SAO, I wanted to ask you.
The site plan was improved quite a bit. I'm concerned about the traffic that will be one way in the alley going into that back building. And the dumpster has been improved too, but still it's going to be a tight, I don't know what kind of equipment they're going to be using, but the equipment they're using on the apartment complex is fairly large. And he can barely get up the alley, and what he has to do is back up the alley. And I don't know whether that's the game plan, whether you can really do the dumpster the way you've got it. And we have, that alley needs to be open because it's the only fire access we've got to the apartments from the south. And I think that's pretty important, and it's also important to my building. I'm right there adjacent to that alley as well. So I was just, I'd like to hear what the plan is for all that. I can see the site plan, but again, it looks to me like a dumpster is either going to have to back in or back out to pick up the dumpster.
It's a two-way drive in the alley.
That's right, there's 2 lanes, but
Right.
It's often filled up, and there's, we have off the wall of our building 3 feet to the pole, so it takes a little bit out. I'll be quiet and you tell me how you want to do that.
Well, we pulled the dumpsters foremost. We brought them forward, essentially, to make it accessible from Dewey Street into the alley. So, in fact, they'll have to back up. They can pull in, pick up the dumpster, pull out, and drive on. We discussed 3-yard dumpsters possibly that can roll, which would remove the obligation of someone of positioning the dumpster enclosure to allow a front approach for the forks on a dumpster, an 8-yard dumpster, for example.
Okay, so you're thinking it'll be a front approach?
Well, it's a front approach, but I don't know if that's an issue that we need to solve at this moment.
It's important to me because the dumpsters in that area have caused a lot of problems for, in terms of they get full, stuff gets dumped in the alley. So it needs to be a functional pickup, and if it is, that's fine with me. But I'm seeing, I guess I'm seeing a guy coming in frontwards and then backing out into that blind curve.
In Bricktown, obviously, there's almost no space for dumpsters. We've been using 3-yard dumpsters pretty exclusively, putting them behind enclosures, because a 3-yard is as big as we can get to with wheels. One guy can handle it, he can pull it out, he can park in a place where he has the access. Because the alley's two-way, I'm not sure I understand why he couldn't drive on to the west. Is
Well,
that-
where are you going to go? You'd have, the west is dead end.
And going up our drive is not, in your mind, not,
No, you can go up the alley
Right.
to the end of the apartment complex, to the east, to the west end of the apartment complex, but that's a dead-end alley. And that's got parking in it often on the building side and on the fence side. So that cuts a lot of the service vehicles will park against the fence on the south side of the alley, and then there's apartment parking on the north side of the alley. So there's not a lot of room for, there's not really much reason for a dumpster to go up that far, is what I'm thinking.
well, if the dumpster is a rolling dumpster, we can probably manage some kind of...
Yeah, I mean, you might be able to manage it, but I'd like to be sure that that's what you're going to do, so that we don't end up with some of the problems we've had before.
Can we defer that item? I'm asking if that's something we can bring as an amendment to this drawing set to let Michael approve.
Well, there could be a provision, I suppose. I'm not sure how to handle it, but I just want to make sure that it's fully thought out.
I'm not really sure, John. I mean, what we were expecting is the truck would just pull in the alley, pick up the dumpster, and then come out our drive there, hit back to 28th, and be on the way.
Come out, which drive?
Come in the alley and then drive on our site, in between the two buildings, and exit out on 28th.
Oh, okay.
I don't really see much difficulty with that.
All right.
I mean, it was a revision from
Yeah,
last.
when you turned all that around, that made it a
Yeah.
lot better.
Yeah,
Okay.
we changed the parking angle to the other way to make it easier for the trash truck to get around.
Yeah. And there's no plan. I'm a little concerned about the condition of the drive on the other sides, usually because it's basically because of the trucks. And I don't want to start a new loop that goes down the parking side in between our two buildings. So
Yeah,
if you're going to take care of that through your drive, then I'm okay with that.
yeah, I prefer the drive to go the other direction just because it makes the traffic pattern smoother for tenants and customers coming in. But switching it this way also makes it a little bit more difficult to get to, which is probably better for the studio spaces anyway. So there'll be less traffic through there, and also easier for the trash trucks. That's why we went ahead and moved with that revision of changing the angle of the parking.
That was my main concern. There's Dewey's, 28th Street is parking on both sides, and it's pretty rough getting up. It's one lane, one direction at a time. So I don't know where everybody's going, but it's a one-way street south, and so if you're coming in, I guess when you come out now, you would be, I guess that's fine, as long as they're not, as long as the residents aren't parking on both sides of the street, you can probably do that.
Okay. I'll just say that I have this exact same picture on my iPhone. I think your point is well made, and I think you've addressed basically the list of things we asked you to address last time. I don't really have any issues. Does anybody else have any questions about this?
I just have a question. you talk about traffic flow and things like that. I see the west elevation, both on the revised plans and last month's plans. The west elevation of the primary building is pretty utilitarian. It looks like a service entrance. Are y'all intending the parking to be primarily used for studio use, or is it intended to be open and used for all visitors?
I won't be regulating the parking. It becomes too difficult to do that.
Will there be access to the primary commercial from the rear, or would people have to walk around?
Say that again.
Would there be access from the parking to the primary commercial building on the east side, or would people have to walk around to the front entrance?
Can customers enter from the west side of the primary building?
Yes.
No.
Okay.
Those will be mainly just service doors. There's the elevator shaft is on the north side, so there'll be pedestrian access there to the second floor. But the rest of it really is just service exits and that type of emergency exits and that type of thing.
Okay. So the parking, for practical purposes, the parking is intended to be predominantly used by the studios, I would guess.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, excellent. Any other questions, motions?
Move approve.
Okay, we have a motion by Robinson and a second by Struble. All in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Okay, it's approved. Thank you, Jeremy. Thank you,
Thank you
Sam.
very much.
Appreciate it. All right, item 6A, 817 Northwest 6th Street. Michael?
This item is for the construction of 14 single-family detached residential structures at the northeast corner of Northwest 6th and Francis. The applicant proposes to build an interior private access drive, and then also involves the construction of fencing and landscaping installation and new sidewalks on both the Francis frontage and the Northwest 6th frontage. We've analyzed the proposed project per the standard development standards and design guidelines. We've addressed a couple of points in your staff report. The first being that there's a regulation in the code that limits the number of units per lot to one per lot, and as you'll notice, we have 14 on one lot, but the applicant proposes to submit a subdivision on this property that would create 14 individual lots for the 14 structures, plus an additional lot for the private access drive in the center of the project. And if he does that, it would be compliant with that provision of the code, that's 12100.1.a lot regulations, and we've made that a condition of approval in support of our recommendation for approval of the project. Secondly, the private access drive regulations that are in the subdivision code, section 5.4.2.e, do require that when you do a private access drive, that drive be a minimum of 24 feet wide with a sidewalk of unspecified width, and no mention of whether there's supposed to be sidewalk on both sides or not. In this case, the applicants proposed a private access drive that is only 22 feet wide, which is 2 feet narrower than required, and he's also proposing not to include a sidewalk of any width along that access drive. That would require a variance because it's regulation, and they are prepared to go forward to the BOA with a request for a variance on those two aspects of the private access drive, and we are recommending that the Urban Design Commission support a recommendation for approval of that variance. Third item identified in the staff report is with respect to the use of IPA wood. It's just a material that's not listed, but there's a provision in the guidelines to allow other materials that are not listed, provided that they are proven to be durable and of high quality. And there have been many homes in the cottage district that have been approved for the use of pipe wood. So we're following a pattern and recommending approval of that. That wood is very durable. It's like teak, and it maintains very well. So that completes our presentation. You may be aware, you should be aware that there have been many pieces of correspondence that our office has received with respect to this application, predominantly in opposition. We have received, I think, 3 or 4 that are in favor of it. They've all been provided to you in your packet. As we've received them, we've been trying to keep you up to date as we get them. I do also want to apologize. The chair did point out the absence of some key information that we did have in our possession when the packet went out, but they were inadvertently not included in the packet, and that would be the elevations as well as the setback diagram that is established to relate to other setbacks along the street frontage, which in this case would be Francis only, since there are no other buildings on this side of the street in the same block on Northwest 6. But you do have those pieces of information now. We provided them to you on, I think, Monday, if not yesterday. So that completes our presentation. We're prepared to respond to any questions the Commission may have. I know the applicant is present, has a presentation, and I know that there are a number of people here who have presentations of their own and prepared to speak to the Commission on the item.
Okay, thank you, Michael. I would actually like to just address one issue or ask you a question but before we have the presentations, and that is that in a number of the opposition letters, the structures were referred to in some as 2- and 3-story, and in others as 3- and 4-story. And so I think the issue of what constitutes a story per the code may be a good one to resolve right off the bat. So I think you had suggested that maybe Mr. Hines or someone would be available to answer that question.
Right. Jeff is here. I'm going to preface that with a few remarks before he
Please do.
starts. First of all, the height limit in this district is 3 stories or 50 feet. And in consultation with the counselor's office, we've been advised that any project does not have the option of meeting one or the other. They must meet both. The projects you have here are 2 stories and 3 stories, and they all have partially enclosed roof decks. So the question becomes whether or not that partially enclosed roof deck constitutes a story, because they all meet the 50-foot height limit, because I think the tallest unit here is 44 feet 6 inches. So the 50-foot height limit is not an issue, and in fact that they are in compliance with the maximum height limit. And I'll let Jeff come up and speak to the issue of the definition of a story and whether or not these partially enclosed roof terraces would constitute a story.
Good afternoon. I apologize, but I haven't had a chance to really look at the plans on these, but we have had discussions. Occupied roofs, the definition of story is pretty clear in both the zoning code and the building code, and it's basically the space between a floor and the floor ceiling above or the roof ceiling above. Occupied roofs are not considered a story, so there are some code requirements for getting people off, access to, that kind of thing, but in the code it doesn't refer to them as a story.
Okay, Jeff, if I could ask you a question, because I'm going to ask you a devil's advocate question, because I know some of the people here are going to want to ask you. In the code, it says a story is that space between the floor and the ceiling. I'm sure you know the code better than I do.
Correct.
So my question is, if you look at those, at the covering over the decks, could someone make the argument that there is a floor and there is a ceiling, therefore that should be a story?
I think the argument could be made. I don't know, are those part of the structure? Are they're a built component of we would probably, and I'd have to look at a better plan, but, you can have a penthouse on a building up to 28 feet in height above the roof, totally enclosed, that's not considered a story, as long as it's less than 1/3 of the area of the roof. And those are really to house equipment, screen, elevator penthouses, things like that. I don't know how large those canopies or that covering
About
is.
231 square feet.
Which, do you know what percentage of the roof that might?
I don't know the
roof
percent.
Space.
What's going on inside the enclosure? What is it? What's the function?
It's just a covered part of the roof terrace.
It probably encloses a stair, I would presume, that serves, you have to put
Yeah,
a
if
stair
it's a
or something.
utility thing like a stair, then you're right. But if it's living space, then it's a story.
I think we've done quite a lot of occupied roofs, typically with fabric canopies, things like that. This one's a little bit different. I think an argument could be made that creates a story. I think it's a stretch, but I could see an argument.
I think it depends on the function and whether the enclosure has got,
It's, I
HVAC.
presume the enclosure, there's just an enclosure around the stair.
Yeah, it looks like there's a full enclosure on the stair with a door at the top of the
Yeah.
stairs, and then
Okay.
the covered area itself has only a wall on the north and on the west. So there's 2 walls out of a possibility of 4 that would be needed to enclose it entirely. And that dashed line would be the limit of that covering, and I would say, just eyeballing that, that's probably close to about 1/3 of that roof terrace.
So it's not actually enclosed. It's
only-
really a shelter.
Looks like more of a shade canopy.
Yeah,
Right.
Yeah.
We probably, in the code side of it, would not consider the roof a story.
John?
We might look at it more as a rooftop structure or a penthouse, and maybe even apply that portion of the canopy to the less than 1/3 of the roof area itself, but that's probably as far as we would go with it.
So Jeff, just to clarify, so you're, in your best estimation, kind of from a planning department perspective, you would not consider that to be a story?
That would be correct.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. I don't have any.
We there's other things in the code. You could put mezzanines between every floor in this building and still not be a story. So you could have, of course, I know you have a height limit. We always have a height limit and a story limit. But you could actually get probably 6 stories in a 3-story building if they complied with a mezzanine. So there's a lot of ways to get more space without creating another story.
Okay.
And my opinion of this would be it's an occupied roof and not a story. And the height would be measured to the deck of the roof, and then that's just a canopy.
Okay. Anyone else have any questions for Jeff? Okay, thank you.
You bet.
So, Michael, if we want to go ahead with the presentation, this might be a good time to do it.
I didn't have anything else to add.
I'm from the developer, the
The
architect.
developer's present, yeah.
I'm Scott Dedman with ADG, 116 East Sheridan, Oklahoma City. So I'm representing New Line Development, and just want to go through quickly some of the thoughts that went into this layout. So it's really a unique site in the Cottage District. Of course, all of this is in DTD1, and specifically in the Cottage District. This site itself is located on 6th Street, which is right on the fringe of the Cottage District. The unique thing about the Cottage District are the neighborhood streets, 7th Street, 8th Street, Francis, and just to kind of give you a feel for what that is, 7th Street's a rather narrow residential-style street, tree line, cars parallel parked at the curb. Again, single-family homes for the most part in those areas, with some multifamily adjacent to that. But that gives you a feel of what 7th Street is like. The other border, 6th Street, is a much different street. It's an arterial street and has a totally different feel than the remainder of the Cottage District. So if you look at that and going down 6th Street, you see there's 4 lanes of traffic. There's parallel parking on each side. There's signalized intersections as we come through. There's commercial buildings, large commercial buildings adjacent to our side, an old church, and then, of course, the intersection with Classen. So we wanted to take some time and look at the development pattern in the Cottage District. And so what we did is we divided this up into low-density housing, higher density housing, meaning that there are more than one resident on a site. So those are shown in the purple. So that may be a single-family house with a garage apartment, or it may be something similar to Classen Glen that's a large multifamily development. But you can see the blue single families, you can see the purple higher density housing areas, and then the red shows the commercial. So the Cottage District and all of this area, DTD1, are really kind of a mixed bag of uses. I mean, it truly is a mixed-use area. And the thing that we're concerned about is what is this commercial residential transition zone? The ordinance speaks specifically to being able to transition from one zone to another in DTD, and we feel like this is one of those transition areas. We went through the ordinance, the ordinance on the purpose and the intent of the ordinance, and just sort of highlighted a few things. One of the things is to create dense urban and mixed-use neighborhoods, to promote urban character, to promote a downtown that's a vital mixed-use area, to encourage transitions between each of the downtown districts, which is something we feel like this project does. Promotes the development of downtown in a manner consistent and compatible with the unique and diverse design elements. And I think, again, as you look at the Cottage District and that whole area, it's definitely diverse because of all the different types of uses, especially along 6th Street. Promote a vibrant and active destination, and I think that activity is created by the density. The creation of a strong building to pedestrian relationship. I think you'll see as we go through the design, the new homes are pushed to the street line, which is in relationship to 6th Street. To support a strong urban environment, and again, I think that speaks to density. Specifically in the Cottage District, there is an ordinance or a suggestion that all of the access to parking to garages are from the public alleys. And then also that the front doors should be a walk-up. They should be raised 24 inches above the ground. I know there are a lot of houses in that area that are not. These are, that actually create that front porch and that stoop feeling. So this is the site that we have to work with. We've got 140 by 200 feet. Adjacent to us is the old church that creates kind of a wall on Francis and really builds almost to the property line on this section and a little further west right to the property line. And then to the east of us is the parking lot for Bel Air, which is still an open site. But they actually own the parking lot plus a little land adjacent to that. On the survey, it is platted as 8 25-foot lots right now, and the plan is to replat that, as Michael said, to approximately a 28.6 by 56-foot lots with and Michael, I think we've looked at that, and we will make that a 24-foot drive, but that will be the way that will be platted in the future. One thing I want to point out are the elevations. So there's a significant hill in the Cottage District, and that's what makes the Cottage District desirable, is that hill. 6th Street, we're at 1,200 feet. The alleyway, we're at 1,212. And then 7th Street, we're up at 1,224. So there's a 24-foot drop across the site from 7th Street to 6th Street. Just looking at the table on sort of the standards for DTD, DTD1, there are no minimum lot sizes. There's no minimum lot widths. Specifically in the cottage district, there's a 50-foot height restriction. There's a minimum height of 30 feet and 2 stories that we have to build without getting a variance. And then there's no requirement for rear yards. So just looking at sort of the development volume that we have to work with, this has been laid in. This is a 50-foot height. We could build to all property lines in this instance and go the full 50 feet. So a couple of the things that we looked at as we were sort of exploring options was to actually use the lots the way they're laid out, come in with 8 townhomes, 8 garages, 8 apartments on top of the garages, and come up with something that looks similar to this. This is another project in another town. The feeling was that this was just a little too much. It was a little too massive. So the thought was to separate those, lose a unit basically, go down to 14 units instead of 16, create some space in between and create some transparency between each unit, and come up with something similar to the look of this. This even kind of shows how this sits with a hillside in the background. After a meeting with the neighbors, there was some discussion about maybe introducing some 2-story units. And so that is what the ultimate design is that we're presenting today, is that we have some 3-story units and some 2-story units that create sort of a rhythm across 6th Street, some variation. And that's an image of the design the way it stands right now. So if we look at a site section, again, this is a section of 824 Northwest 7th, so we can just see the relationship of the existing house. We have the house that sits up basically at street level. There's a garage apartment that enters from the alley, that looks onto the alley. This is a section through one of the 3-story units with the elevation of the roof deck on the north unit at 1243, again, well under the 50-foot limitation. And then on the 7th Street side, our roof deck's up at 1237. And then, of course, same situation on the 2-story. We're showing the same relationship to the same house, but the roof deck's at 1233 and 1227 on those. So again, pretty significant drop because of that grade, and again, we are taking advantage of the grade as well, that the north units sit a little bit higher than the south units. And just in a sort of an overall context, how the development sits along 7th Street. So you can see the massing of the church, the massing of the buildings at the Valair. These are our adjacent uses that we're dealing with. Some of the other commercial development along that. So we think the massing fits well with the activity that's going on along 6th Street. And then looking back toward the neighborhood, again, you can see the massing of the church along with the massing of our development, the massing of Valair, and then again, the difference in the width of 6th Street and the activity on 6th Street as compared to 7th or 8th or Francis. So we know views are a big issue, so we wanted to take a look at that. What we've done is we've taken the mass model, located that in Google Earth, and we're taking views from Google Earth. We've found that the terrain is pretty accurate on Google Earth and gives us a good representation of what you will actually see. So this is the roof deck at 719 North Francis. This is Brian's house. So this is what we project the view to look like from that location. This is 834. This was the house that Dennis Wells built on the corner of 7th and Francis. And this was is the view from approximately his living room window, or the living room window of that residence. This would be 832. This is the single-story house that sits there. You can see that's, anytime there's additional development going on, some of the view is going to be blocked. This would be the I think this is 824, I believe, right next to it. That's has been built since that house was built. And then this would be from the second level deck of 824, looking downtown. So you can see that the development's just off to the side. So this is the site plan, this layout. So we've got a three-bedroom unit, or a 3-story unit and a 2-story unit that enter the garage from the private alleyway. So each house has a 2-car garage, and then a small courtyard beside it. And then the north units enter from the alleyway, from the public alleyway, into the 2-car garage. There are no curb cuts along 6th Street. Everything would be accessed from the private drive in the back, so we're maintaining very good walkability along 6th Street. The units themselves, just briefly, the ground floor of the 3-story unit would have a small bedroom or a study, and then the garage. You go up to the second level, that's the living level with the kitchen and the living room, and then the third level is the bedroom level with 2 bedrooms on that level, and then the roof terrace. And again, the enclosure is only the staircase. It's only the staircase. The canopy is just a canopy that protects the staircase door and creates a shaded area on the roof. And then the roof deck is only approximately half of the total roof. The 2-story unit, the 3-story unit's about 1,900 square feet. The 2-story unit's about 1,600 square feet. Again, the first level is the living room level, the kitchen. Second level is the bedroom level with either 2 or 3 bedrooms. There's an alternate plan to create 3 bedrooms on that level. And then again, the staircase and the canopy to the roof terrace. The elevations are pretty clean and simple. The material palette I'll show you in a second, but it's primarily stucco masonry and the Ipe siding. You can kind of see the legend on the side of the different materials. And I'll just point out the little pop-up for the staircase on the roof. So that's what you're looking at there. So we have three shades of stucco, a white, a medium gray, and a dark gray. The Ipe siding. There's a little bit of wood fence on the east side, and it would be stained to match the board-formed concrete. And then we're using a black brick as the masonry on that.
Hey, Scott, just a quick question about the Ipe. I noticed the materials, it's said it's maintenance-free, which my understanding it is, but if you don't do anything with it, it changes color from that brown to kind of a silver grayish.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And you're fine with that, and the developer's fine with that, and understand
Yeah,
it.
yeah. I mean, it turns to a very, very rich silver gray, or you keep it sealed, and it'll maintain its original color.
Okay. So I just want to make the point that the color after a while probably won't look like the color.
No, any natural wood's going to change to a darker tone or change as it oxidizes.
Okay.
So this is a shot down 6th Street, and you can see the porches that are created. So there's it raises up a couple of feet to create the porch, and it's protected by a small planter, and then a few more steps up to the living level. So the porch is slightly lower than the living space. The 3-story units have a balcony that looks to the south at the living level. All of the entry doors are at the steps and kind of a side entry. This is a view from the porch, and I think the interaction with the street here is pretty evident that that could be a really strong thing to create some activity with the street, to be able to sit out on your front porch. And again, enjoy the view until somebody across the street that has no height limit can come in and build 8 or 10 stories across the street from you. This is the 6th and Francis view, and you can see the roof decks and a little better description of the canopy and the way the pop-up for the stairs and the roof deck works. View from one of the roof decks. And actually, this is one of the north units looking across the south homes. This is a view down the private alley, and again, we see this done in pavers so that it's more of a parking court than an alleyway, but a place that people can actually come out and enjoy that space more than just a service alley. And this is the alley, the public alley that exists. Just one of the views at night. And then there are a couple of letters that were sent in support of this project that I wanted to speak about. And one was from Dennis Wells that talked about when he purchased his lot at 7th and Francis, and that they spent some time studying the fact that there were height restrictions, or there was the ability to build 50 feet on that lot, and to study the views, and they did, and they purchased the lot anyhow and still built their house because they knew they could see beyond the 50 feet and still see the skyline. One thing he pointed out was the fact that all of these ordinances were in place when most of these new houses were built, so this information was available to everybody when they purchased and built their houses in this area. And another one that came in from Dr. Lavallo. I think one thing that he mentioned that was particularly true, and that deals with the fact that 6th Street is a significantly different street than what 7th Street is. And you're not going to get individuals that want to come in and build multi-million-dollar houses on 6th Street. So the idea with with Northline is to build some houses that are going to be reasonably affordable, and to be able to offer those. And that's just the different conditions that piece of land has. Steve Mason's not going to build his house on 6th Street. I think the other thing that Dr. Lavallo pointed out too is the fact that it's zoned commercial. So it could be a bar, it could be a restaurant, it could be a big box retail. So all of those are possible within the ordinance. And I think one of the other things is the fact that this gives some opportunities for people to buy in this area and make this area a more desirable place to live. Some people that may not afford to be able to go out and build a custom home in this area. Gives them the chance to be a part of this neighborhood as well and to increase the population of that area. The buildings that we're building are quality buildings. They are not tract homes. They are essentially custom homes, and it's designed as a sort of as one composition in that area as a custom project. So anyhow, I will stop at that. But we feel like it's a very strong project. We also feel like this is a very different part of the Cottage District than up the hill. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Scott. Any questions or comments?
Yeah, I had a question. I know the price was kind of brought up a little bit. Do you have a price point? I mean, so these...
They're hoping to be in the $400,000 range. Yep.
Any other questions? No? Okay, Lee, did you want to speak?
My name is Lee Peoples. The proposed development is directly behind my house at 824 Northwest 7th Street. I'm going to talk about several aspects of the development today. First, the development is out of character and context and does not incorporate the scale and proportions of the block pattern as required by the guidelines. Second, the development does not transition to the adjacent block or the rest of the district in a way that respects the scale and character of the adjacent uses as required by the guidelines. Third, the height exceeds the maximum allowed and is not within the character and context of the district. Fourth, the development impacts skyline views from adjacent properties in a way that is not permitted by the guidelines, and I'll conclude by discussing their use of the alley. Obviously, this sounds like quite a lot of information, but I think if you agree with me on the first point that it is out of scale, it does not respect the character and the context, and you are willing to bring that down, all of those other issues can be taken care of. The handout in front of you has some of the images that I will show on the PowerPoint in a little bit larger size, so they may be easier to use. First, let's talk about how the proposal is not within the character and context of the built environment as required by the guideline, and how the proposal does not incorporate the scale and proportions of the block pattern as required by the development pattern guideline. It's important to note that scale is defined in the zoning code. The zoning code defines scale as the size and proportion of a building relative to surrounding buildings and environs, adjacent streets, and pedestrians. Under this definition of building size and proportions and how it relates to other buildings on the land that it sits is relevant to determine if it's in scale. I conducted a survey of all the existing residences in the Cottage District to get a sense of the character and the context of the built environment. You have that's the front copy of your handout. I also wanted to get a sense of the scale and proportions of the homes that made up the district, and I only included homes in the Cottage District. I did not include things like the applicant showed in his drawing, things with colors on them, the Classen Glen apartments. I did not include those because they're not in the Cottage District. It's my understanding they were specifically carved out when the district was formed because they didn't fit the character. I have copies of the data underlying this survey if you'd like to take a look at it. But let's start and take a look at the row across the very top. This is the average for the overall Cottage District. At the very top of the first column there on the left, you see the average lot size is 6,321 square feet. It's also important to note, though, that 73% of the residential lots in the district are 7,000 square feet. 7,000 square feet is the typical 50 by 140-foot residential lot, and this defines the block pattern of the district. For your reference, the project before you today is made up of only 4 of these typical 50 by 140 size lots. The next column over shows you that the houses that sit on these lots have an average footprint of 1,414 square feet. Now, I got the idea to use footprint from the discussion you had in the Lynn case. During the discussion, the planning staff mentioned that the footprint of a house, of the Lynn house, had to come within the guidelines to be approved. And just before the vote was taken, one commissioner said that a comparison of the Lynn house footprint with the footprints of other houses in the district would be very helpful to determine if the house was under the guidelines. So looking now at that first column in yellow, this shows you the average footprint of 1,414 square feet, that it takes up only 26% of the size of the lot on average throughout the district. The next column over gives you the total square footage, not just footprint. And we see that in the Cottage District, that is just under 2,000 square feet. The next column over will show you that total square footage, that 2,000 average, that it takes up just 34% of the lot size on average. The final column is about height, and from the Lynn staff report, we know the range of maximum height, not average height, in Cottage is between 28 and 32 feet. So this gives you an idea of the character, context, and scale of the district and helps us understand the block pattern found in the district. Now, in the next row down, I have the numbers for the adjacent block. This is the block that sits just north of the proposed development, and you can see it's very close in terms of average footprint as percentage of lot size, square footage as percentage of lot size, and it's actually below the maximum height. Below that adjacent block, I have the 2 projects that you recently refused to approve under the development pattern guideline. This is the Hawes proposal to put 3 homes on a single 50 by 140 lot, and the Lynn proposal to put a very large home on a single 50 by 140 lot. When we look at footprint relative to lot size in the yellow column, we see a range for these rejected proposals between 34 and 79%. The second yellow column shows us total square footage relative to lot size between 63 and 77%. You can see these are well both outside the averages for the cottage district, and in these cases the UDC did a good job of applying the guideline and requiring new development to incorporate and respect the character, context, and scale and the block pattern of adjacent uses. It's very clear that UDC members and staff recognize the significance of the cases before you the last couple of months. In listening to the discussion just before the vote in the Hawes case last month, one commissioner noted that if a proposal to put 3 houses on one 50 by 140-foot lot was approved, quote, we would set a precedent and you would see more to come in and try to do this, and this would change the character of what's been established. If the residents are against it and there's a feeling it's too much, this is the time to say it is too much. You couldn't say it's too much next time, that's it, you've changed the character. That was the end of the discussion. Thankfully, you said it was too much last month, and you set a bright line rule that 3 homes on a 50 by 140 square foot lot does not comply with the guidelines. The proposal today goes above and beyond what you rejected in the Hawes proposal. These developers are trying to put 3.5 homes on each of their 4 50 by 140 foot lots. They want to put a total of 14 homes on land that typically holds only 4 homes in the cottage district. Now, I would imagine the developer would respond by saying the proposal is different because it faces 6th Street, and the architect pointed out some characteristics of 6th Street. And I would admit that somewhat higher scale is appropriate on 6th Street. But I would remind you of Development Pattern Guideline G4C that requires a transition from new development that respects the scale and character of adjacent uses. This proposal has no transition to the very small-scale structures on the north side of the alley, and it does not respect the scale of the traditional block pattern that you find to the adjacent block to the north and throughout the district. They simply repeat the design they had proposed for 6th along the alley and to the block to the north. This is not a transition. Also, if you look closely at the location, if you remember where the Hawes proposal was, it isn't that different from the location of the proposal before you today. On the north side of the alley, north of Hawes, they have a commercial business and an apartment complex. Hawes is only 3 lots in from Classen, and it's 2 lots away from a motel. So I don't see much of a distinction, really, in rejecting the Hawes proposal and the proposal that's before you today. Now let's take a look at their proposal and see if it's within the character, context, and scale of the rest of the district. The row that says North Line proposed average 817 Northwest 6 will give you the average for both their 4-story units and their 3-story units. Below that, I broke out the average for the 4-story unit and the 3-story unit. I derived my figures from their submittal, and UDC staff gave me the 1,653 square feet per lot. The first yellow column will show you the average footprint relative to lot size at 64%. This is double the average for the cottage district. It is above the percentage you rejected in the Hawes proposal to put 3 homes on 1 lot. The category, though, that really stands out is square footage relative to lot size. This is the next yellow column over. Their average is 135% of total square footage to lot size. And this really illustrates how out of scale, character, and context this proposal is. It is 4 times the average for the cottage district and significantly above the 2 that you rejected over the last couple of months. Now I'd like to discuss the transition to the typical block pattern. The image here shows you the traditional block pattern, and this is also in your packet, found throughout the district of 50 by 140-foot lots. And I have imposed 4 of those over the development as red lines. Recall that in my survey I found that 73% of the residences sit on these 50 by 140 lots. Obviously, the developer is trying to squeeze a large number of homes onto this piece of land and not incorporating the block pattern as required by the guideline. Now, after this copy in your handout, I've got some pictures of residences within the cottage district to give you an idea of the scale of them and of the traditional block pattern. To conclude my comments on character, context, and scale, I want to point out the applicant in their letter said their goal was design homes that are compatible with housing stock in the district in terms of scale. As the data shows, as the survey shows, they clearly have not done that. The scale of this project must be reduced in light of the guidelines, the survey data, and your own precedent. One way to bring it into scale would be to reduce the number of townhomes. This would allow the developer to increase the size of the lots, and the square footage to land ratio would come back into scale with what we find in the cottage district. For example, if the lot size were increased to 4,500 square feet, this would bring square footage as a percentage of lot size between 46 and 52%, and this would be on the border for what could be acceptable in the cottage district. It would definitely be below what you rejected over the last couple months. I think reducing the height or the size of the residences could help. Arranging them on the land, more in keeping with the traditional block pattern, could also help. Reducing the scale of this project would also be in keeping with the downtown development framework, which you reviewed and approved in March. The framework states that existing cottage district regulations are intended to enforce low-density residential land use. The framework also identifies low-density development as a key character element of the district. Now I'd like to discuss how the development does not transition to the adjacent block or the rest of the cottage district in a way that respects the scale and character of adjacent uses as required by Guideline G4C. This is extremely significant because the proposal would join the most stable residential block in the entire district. Here's a picture of some of the homes that you find in this block. This block has 3 of the oldest residences in the cottage district. 2 are from 1925, 1 is from 1915. This is the block where all the redevelopment in the district started. I chose to build my home here because it was the most stable. Not requiring this proposal to provide the required appropriate transition and to respect the scale and character would really be a shame. Now this slide, it's in your packet under the tab Transition, shows you what this project looks like as it tries to transition to the structures on the north side of the alley. If you start at the top left there, and you will see a 2-story, 2,500 square foot house built in 1925. Moving to the right, behind the trees, there is a single-story, 1,200 square foot house. If you continue to move to the right, you will see my 2-story garage apartment that is just 575 square feet, and then there is a vacant lot. That is all the property immediately north of this proposal. The square footage of those structures is 4,343. As you can see, the scale of those structures is small. Immediately below the photo, we have the alley. And then immediately south of the alley, we have the proposed 4 units at 4 stories at 45 feet tall and 3 3-story units at 35 feet tall. Altogether, just these 7 townhomes, their total square footage is 16,000 square feet. Remember, across the alley, we have only 4,300. It's an increase of nearly 4 times. And from what I can tell, the developer has not made any effort to make a transition that would respect the scale and character as required by the guideline. The developer just wants to put the same townhomes that they have put on 6th Street up against an alley that has a very different character than 6th Street. There is no green space, there's no transition, there's no buffer, just 16,000 square feet of what would be the tallest residence in the entire district, packed more tightly on land than anywhere else in the district. I have some pictures to show you how their 4-story townhome relates to the structures on the alley and beyond. This is their 4-story, 45-foot-tall townhome compared to my 20-foot-tall garage apartment. This is really illustrative. This is their 4-story, 45-foot-tall townhome compared to the shortest house on the adjacent block, which is only 14 feet tall. And this is their 4-story unit as it relates to my house, which is 26 feet tall, the tallest house on the block. It is still significantly larger. As these pictures demonstrate, there is no transition and no respect for the scale and character for what's on the other side of the alley. In addition to pictures, I've also pulled out the data there from the survey of just the adjacent block and compared it to the Northline proposal. As you can see in the yellow columns, they call for twice the amount of footprint to lot size and nearly 3 times the amount of square footage to lot size. The data confirms what the photos show you. In the packet behind this chart, I've got photos of all the houses on the adjacent block with data about their scale in there for you to review. To conclude my points about a transition, the number of units, their scale, their height must be reduced in order for the proposal to comply with the guidelines and provide an appropriate transition to the most stable block in the district. Another solution would be to use the land south of the alley for a green space or maybe 1-story structures, and this could help provide an appropriate transition. Let's move on and discuss height. I'd like to talk about the 4-story townhomes that are prohibited by the zoning code. As the city staff member mentioned, in the cottage district, you can only build to 3 stories or 50 feet. And as the staff member confirmed, it is whichever you get to. Either you get to 3 stories or either you get to 50 feet and you're too tall. The zoning code has a specific provision on how it is to be interpreted. and it should be held to minimum requirements. So applying that to the 3 stories or 50-foot rule, which is exactly what the staff member said, when you get over either one of those, you are too tall. But we need to look again at the definition of story to know how this is going to apply to the Northline proposal. As the staff member correctly stated, a story is a space between a floor and the ceiling above it. As you can see in that rendering, there is a floor below that red arrow. There is a ceiling above it. That makes it 4 stories and prohibited by the zoning code. I think it was telling that the planning department personnel had not looked at the plans and said that an argument could be made that this is 4 stories. I think that sends an indication to you that that is something the Board of Adjustment needs to decide. They need a variance for this. If you require people who want to build 1-story homes to get a variance, I think you should require that here as well. There's also language in the zoning code. There's a footnote to that height limit, and they specifically mention things that are not a story, and they do not mention a roof terrace, a roof deck, anything like that. That is not excluded from being a story. So roof terrace, roof deck is not excluded from counting as a story. I think it was also interesting that the applicant in their packet, rendering A 2.8 for the 3-story townhome, they call the 3rd story exactly what it is, a 3rd floor. But when you look at rendering A 2.2, the 4-story unit, they have changed the name there to roof terrace. Besides the fact that these are 4 stories tall, they are 45 feet and 35 feet tall, and they do not respect the scale and the character of adjacent uses as required by the Development Pattern Guideline. Here we know that the maximum range is between 28 and 32 feet tall for homes in the Cottage District. The adjacent block is 26 feet tall. This establishes the scale and character of height in the district. And we know that their 4-story townhome is 3 times taller than the shortest home on the adjacent block, and twice as tall as the tallest home. So the height of these townhomes do not respect the scale and character of the Development Pattern Guideline. We also have some guidance from the Lynn staff report, the case you considered 2 months ago. The staff took issue with the Lynn house, not so much because it was 26 feet tall, but because it carried that height across almost the entire lot width. And the staff noted that other multi-story family homes in the district take up just a half or 3/4 of the lot width, and concluded this proposal seems to push the envelope and by comparison will dwarf many homes on the surrounding blocks. You can see by looking at how this 4-story unit relates to the homes on the surrounding block, it is definitely going to dwarf them. The townhomes, like the Lynn house, carry their height across almost the entire lot depth and almost the entire lot width. Here's the 4-story unit, and at the railing with the arrow, you're at 38 feet 6 inches. It is carrying that almost across the entire depth of the lot. Here is the 4-story unit viewed from the front, carrying that almost the entire width of the lot. The 3-story unit does the same thing, carrying 28 feet of height across almost the entire depth and 28 feet of height across almost the entire width. If you are going to reject the Lynn house for doing this at 26 feet, these should also be rejected for carrying that height across at 38 and 28. To conclude my points about height, I'd also like to look at the downtown development framework. The drafters, when discussing vertical massing, had the option of choosing for the Cottage District. Vertical massing. Projects are encouraged to maximize density as the market allows. This option was selected for Downtown Business District and Bricktown, but not for Cottage. For Cottage, they chose high-density development employs context-sensitive design, emphasizing harmonious relationships between new and existing buildings. Clearly, this would fit very well in Downtown Business or Bricktown, but it just does not fit in the Cottage District. Now I'd like to move on and discuss views. Views of the downtown skyline are essential to the character of the Cottage District. Many of us bought our land and built our homes with these views in mind. Most of the letters you received confirm that views make up the character of the Cottage District. I know the term character has been used quite a lot in your recent meetings, so I want to be very careful here in calling views part of the character of the district. Let's look at how the zoning code defines character. It is attributes, qualities, and features that make up and distinguish a particular place or development and give such place a sense of definition, purpose, and uniqueness. We have a clear example of downtown views giving the Cottage District a sense of definition from the Downtown Design Framework. The framework lists downtown views as a key character element of the district. It defines views as part of the character of the Cottage District. The proposed development will completely eliminate downtown views from 3 residences and significantly reduce them from 2 others. Because views are part of the character of the district, allowing this to go forward with such a severe impact on views would not be in keeping with the guidelines which require you to apply the guidelines to preserve the character and context of the urban environment. Nor would it be in keeping with the development pattern guideline, which requires new development to respect the character of adjacent uses. Now, several years ago, you faced this very issue of a proposed residence blocking the views of downtown of neighbors, and you established a clear precedent on how you handled these cases. The case was UDCA 2010-10. I'm very familiar with it because it was my house. I came to the UDC for approval and learned for the first time that a neighbor was objecting to me blocking his view. The neighbor asked that we move our house a considerable amount. It would have been beyond what you allowed for the setback line, basically been in the street. You refused to approve us, and you sent us away to work out a compromise. You asked us to prepare view studies and to work together to try to come to some resolution. We met together. We prepared studies, and I want to point out that we did that together. Both people were there. I was there. The neighbor was there. I could see where he was putting the camera. We even took GPS coordinates. I know that the applicant has shown you some view studies, but none of the neighbors whose views were impacted were involved in that at all. And I live in one of the houses that they showed you the view study of, and I don't think it's accurate. Downtown looks much taller than it really is. I have some real questions about those view studies. But back to my case, because I think it's important in how you handled this. In meeting with the neighbor, we met several times. I offered to move my house to the north, to the east, to try to improve their views. The neighbor still had his heels dug in and said, no, you've got to move it, almost to the street. It was over 10 feet. He wanted me to move the house. We came back. We explained where we were, that we hadn't agreed to anything, but here's what I was willing to compromise, and the UDC accepted that. And I think that sets a precedent that when views are impacted, the parties have to work together and the parties have to compromise. And I think you'll agree when you see the view from that neighbor. The neighbor has since moved out, but this is the view from his current house. From the neighbor who lives there now, his views are not impacted much at all. The only impact, if you see in the left picture, the red iron, is part of my deck, but otherwise he enjoys very good views. And the developers may tell you that, and I think they have told you that we met, not just me, but several of the neighbors and the developers met. But that meeting was quite unproductive. At that meeting, they showed us a rendering. I didn't recognize it in any of the renderings shown to you, but it's possible that it was. There were 14 three-story units, no rooftop decks. There were no measurements on those drawings. There were no perspectives from the surrounding buildings. It was very abstract and hard to really tell how it was going to impact us at all. When some neighbors questioned this, the developers brought out a solid 50-foot tall block, which they showed you, and said, if you don't like this, too bad. Zoning lets us build this. They were unaware, I guess, of the guidelines that definitely would not let them build this. Near the conclusion of the meeting, they asked to come to my house and take pictures of how the view would be impacted. And I said, yes, but I'd also like you to go to the neighbors to the west whose views are going to be impacted worse than mine. We haven't heard back from the neighbors about that, from the developers about that. So I'd like to show you an example of a view that will be totally wiped out by the development here. This is 712 North Francis, and I think they may have shown you what they thought was a view study from this house. And you can see downtown looks quite a bit smaller. Their proposed development would go in where the grass is, and they would have absolutely no view. I think at the very least, the developer should be required to make more of an effort to work with the neighbors, to prepare with us some view studies, not just to prepare their own that we don't have a chance to be involved with and make sure they're accurate, and to try to reach some kind of compromise. That's what you required of me when I was here several years ago building my house, and I would ask that you require the same of the developer. Now, very briefly, I'll conclude and talk about the alley. They propose to put 7 two-car garages on the alley, and this does not preserve the character and the context of the urban environment or make an appropriate transition that is respectful of the scale and character of the neighborhood. In addition to the study I showed you earlier, I also did an alley study of all the alleys in the Cottage District behind residences. And this is in your packet behind the tab alley. There are 9 alleyways behind residences in the district. They contain a total of 75 parking spaces. Average number of spaces per alley is just 8.3. And this establishes, I think, the character and the context of the alleys in the district. The alley adjacent to the proposal has 10 parking spaces. The developer wants to add 14 more, bringing that to 24. This would be 3 times the average found in the district, and the most parking spaces in any alley of the district, and it does not preserve the character and the context of the urban environment as required by the guidelines. There's an easy solution to this, though. Just reduce the number of units on the alley, and that really takes care of all the problems I brought up today. Reduce their number, reduce their height, reduce their scale, and I think a lot of the other people that are here objecting, I don't want to speak for them, but I think that would really take care of a lot of our issues. I want to just mention they did talk about the guideline that says that alleys, where alleys are accessible, front-facing garages should not be permitted. The zoning code has 3 words that are mandatory. Those are shall, must, and will. On this ordinance, it says should, so I think you have some discretion here, and you aren't forced to require garages on the alley. Let me conclude. The significance of your decision today is tremendous. Last month, you saw the Hawes proposal trying to do this on a much smaller scale, and thankfully, you rejected it and set a bright line rule. It's important to note that the people that wrote in and the people that are going to speak in a minute aren't just people like me that live in the adjacent block. There are people from all over the district that are very concerned about this project. I don't think this land would never be developed. I didn't think that when I bought the lot, and I don't think it today. And I think the proposal has some good things going for it, and it can be changed to be brought within context of the guidelines. But the only thing keeping this from happening is the developer trying to just put as many houses on there as they can and get as much return on investment as they can. That is not mentioned anywhere in the zoning code or the guidelines, that the developer is entitled to a maximum return on investment. So in conclusion, I simply state that the proposal doesn't comply with the guidelines, and I respectfully ask that you not approve it as submitted. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Lee? Were there any immediate clarifying questions for Lee before we hear from other members of the audience? No? Okay, thank you. Thank you, Lee. Just to give me a sense, who all would like to comment on this further? Okay, so maybe we'll just start in the front and move back, and then back to you. And I would just ask that if a point has been made before, if you just want to touch on it to reemphasize it, that's fine, but please don't make it again. I'm sure you'll understand why. Please.
Hi, my name is Beth Rutledge. I live at 712 North Francis with my husband and our 3 children. This project would be situated directly beside us, behind us, and above us. It would literally block the flow of sunlight and fresh air to our home and through the backyard where our children play. It would also completely block our view of the skyline, which was the focal point of our home's dramatic rehabilitation in 2006. We moved our family to the Cottage District in 2008. Our realtors, bankers, colleagues, friends, family members thought we were insane. We were a family with young children in a pretty run-down and crime-ridden area, but we said, sign us up, and we literally risked everything to be here. And all these years later, I think it's fair to say that the explosive growth in our neighborhood is a direct result of the desire for people to have a unique single-family home that is designed around the Cottage District's sweeping skyline views. That people come here to build around these views is a very strong indicator that these views are held to be a key component of that character and context. Lee made points about the scale mass and ill fit to the proportions of our block pattern. The density is so great, it certainly dwarfs the existing homes, my home, and there isn't a transition to indicate a thoughtful design from the neighborhood, which Lee pointed out is the most stable. It was kind of where it all began. We go straight from these low-density 1- and 2-story homes to 14, I would certainly refer to them as tract homes, piled onto a lot that would otherwise hold 4, and to maximize profits and financially exploit the same views that they would shamelessly take from us. And I'm not persuaded by this developer's argument that they're part of this community, and that they care about its future. Parking in front of a property and an investment property long enough to sell it does not make you a member of this community. Literally, a quote from a September 29th meeting from this developer was, "So, I want to make $1 million. Let's be clear, this is what we're dealing with here." I'm not persuaded by the idea that this fills a need in our community. Diversity, if you look at the square footage and look at $280+ a square foot, this isn't what they say it's going to be. And I would say that a hostile takeover, a subdivision takeover of our neighborhood would certainly detract from every single aspect of what's made it unique and what has fueled its growth from the very beginning. So basically, for all the reasons that Lee pointed out in detail, and in all the numerous letters that you all have received, this project as proposed should absolutely be denied, period. Thank you.
Thank you. Just a reminder to state your name and address, and there's something to sign in.
My name's Art Rutledge. I live at 712 North Francis Avenue. My family and I moved into the Cottage District, as my wife said, back in 2008, at a time when there were very few residents. But we immediately felt a sense of community that we've never experienced before. We love our beautiful home, and we love our neighbors who have become our best friends. I find it infuriating that this developer would tout sweeping skyline views as a major selling point while destroying ours and our fellow neighbors. And this is without a doubt would be detrimental to our property values. It's the very reason every home in the area has been built around these skyline views, and very much a huge part of the character and context of our neighborhood. Obviously, out of respect for time, I won't repeat all that was previously said. I would like to state for the record that I fully support and agree with everything Lee Peoples said in his presentation and the numerous letters in opposition to this project. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm T.T. Wynn. I live at 719 North Francis Avenue, and I won't repeat what my neighbors have already very eloquently stated, which brought up some very good points about our concerns for congestion, the increased density in the neighborhood. Wanted just to state my opposition to this development. I also knew, having been one of the first residences to build, one of the first people to build in the neighborhood, that eventually that was going to be developed. That land would be developed, and I'm not opposed to residents. I just had hoped that the development would have been something more sensitive and responsive to the neighborhood. And I do have some concerns about the view studies that were presented by ADG. I'm not sure that, I don't think those are accurate. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Jessica Nelson. We are building at 604 Northwest 7th. We also have property at 715 North Dewey. I am speaking for, we are on the far east side of the Cottage District, and I would just agree with everything Lee Peoples said about respecting the guidelines of the neighborhood and more transition, and my respectful request be to deny as submitted and have something a little more sensitive to the neighbors and the neighborhood in reference to the guidelines. Sorry, I'm going to write down my...
Bill or Linda, I didn't know if you had your hands up or not. Yes, sir.
My name is Brian Dell. I live at 925 Northwest 8th Street. My wife is here with me today. I was here about a month ago on the matter that Mr. Peoples talked about at 915 Northwest 8th. We have the same objections for this project as we had for that one. There were some additional things, though, as I heard here today, that I'd like to comment. My wife raised the question, for example, will you have 14 places in this lot, in these 4 lots that we're talking about, with 7 of them back against the alley? She was wondering, for example, if the city would actually pick up trash by going down the alley. They don't appear to do that anyplace else in the Cottage District. Then there was this issue with regard to the what you referred to as a roof terrace. As I heard, the square footage of this roof terrace was something like 800 square feet, and the question was raised about what is that as a percentage of it. If indeed the 4-story buildings, or the 3-story, however you want to refer to them, have 2,300 square feet, then if it's 800 square feet for this roof terrace, then it would be 25% actually more of the actual square footage, and not counting that in the square footage. So in my view then, that to call that not a floor would be pretending that it's not a floor. One of the concerns that we had whenever we were talking about 915 Northwest 8th Street was the number of cars that would be involved in a situation like that. If you have 14 cars, 14 buildings here, there's going to be 28 cars typically, whenever you're going to have 2 cars per space. That actually totals out to be more cars than would fit in that Valera parking lot that appears to be next to it. Not only that, because of the fact that 7 of the units are behind, that means that anybody that comes to visit these people are going to have to park on where? 6th Street. And I don't know how you're going to fit the potential for another 28 cars to be parked on 6th Street for that thing. I'd only note further that with regard to the number of people that wrote in, there were 10 letters against and 2 for, and there's quite a few folks here today that are against it, and that's all that I have to say. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Dell. Anyone who's next on this side? Nope? Nope? No. Yes, sir.
Hi. Excuse me. My name is Scott Johnson. I live at 3308 Garden Hill Drive in Edmond, and I'm here representing support for this project. I moved up to Oklahoma City area 3 years ago, and during that time looked long and hard in this Cottage District area for housing, but we were not prepared to build at the time. So we made the classic mistake of moving to Edmond. My wife and I are, our children are grown and gone, and we have been looking to move downtown for the last 2.5 years. And this type of development represents what we are looking for in downtown. And I work for a major oil company in the city, and this type of development is exactly what we're looking for. And I understand and empathize with the neighbors on 7th that their view could be impacted a bit. I think a lot of that is overstated, but I'm here in support of the project, and I just wanted to come forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. Any other audience members? Yes, sir.
I'll fill that out when I'm done, if that's okay. My name is Spencer Gwynn. I live at 815 Northwest 8th Street in one of the duplexes the one duplex that is there on 8th Street. I moved to this area from the Belle Isle neighborhood because of this type of development. I plan on staying in the area where I am, whether it's that house or possibly moving to this site at some point in the near future. But I moved to this area because of the modern home, because of the look, and because of the development. I think that's what this development represents, the growth of this area, the growth of Oklahoma City. I support it.
Okay, thank you. Any other audience members? All right. Any commissioners have initial thoughts, comments, questions?
My first thought is if the applicant would be willing to do a 30-day extension to kind of meet more with the neighbors that are, since we have so many people protesting and concerns, so they're
Are they willing to do that?
I am Vincent Lee with Northline Development. We have tried to meet with the neighbors and speak with them about any ideas or anything that can be financially viable to do this project. And unfortunately, the discourse in the meeting didn't go as we had hoped, and I don't think it would go any better if we did try again. There are certain financials in play where we have to develop a certain amount of square footage. But to say that we are doing everything to maximize square footage and maximize profit is completely untrue. We would do connected walls. We could fit 20 townhomes connected on the property. So to say that we're trying to maximize profits, or to say that I said that I'm going to try to make $1 million is absolutely untrue. This is the least profitable thing we could possibly do on this site and still make a profit.
Why I ask that, because it's going to be hard for me to approve this without seeing if everything's been, has been tried to compromise with the neighbors.
And I understand that. And I did welcome everybody to my house. And I said, if anybody has a better idea, we're definitely open to it. And unfortunately for me, nothing came out of it except to put the 2 stories in so there's some sight line through.
I can speak to that. I was actually at that meeting, and that was a month or so prior to UDC application. It was about a 15-minute meeting. We were shown some rough images. That was the first that it was ever seen, and then there was obviously a surprise, and people reacted with, what about making a transition? And that was the last we heard. They said they would go back and look at it, and then the next application was in front of UDC with actually taller structures than was shown to the neighborhood.
Just a couple comments. While I appreciate the concern of views, views are not a protected thing. And the presentation showed that 50-foot or 3 stories could be built. In my estimation, it looks like dropping down some of the units in between the 3 and 2-story units meet the guidelines and are actually in context and character with the surroundings. 6th Street is a much wider, busier street. And I think the most important part is the elevation change from 6th to 7th. And it looks like in their presentation, I don't know if you can go back to it, but the top of these was the same as the top of some of the structures on 7th Street. That's just my comment on it.
Anyone else? Any other?
Well, going back with that point, I think meeting with the neighbors, and I'll say it one more time, just to try to ease some of their concerns with that could maybe go a long way, where, to convince some of the neighbors of what you're doing might not affect their site as much as they think, or the density of it. So that's my 2 cents.
Anyone else? I have to say that in looking at the code, I'm unclear. There are a few areas, but I'm unclear how we can deny this per the code. A lot of points have been made, and if anyone wants to question me on them, I'm willing to answer. But this density is allowed per the code. It's distinctly different from the Haas residence on 8th, because 8th was a street between Francis and Class, and didn't even have full access to Class, and only partial access to Class, and it was a local street. And then you can look at Chartel, which has multifamily on it, which is a collector street, and has been pointed out, 6 is an arterial street. And in fact, if you look at the code regarding in the same development pattern section, it states street walls formed by existing buildings along arterials and massing of buildings at corners should be maintained. So I almost think that you couldn't, if you wanted to develop typical single family here, that the code mandates that you have a street wall, and I interpret the block pattern as meaning the block pattern where you are, and along 6th Street, that would be the block pattern that you would base the criterion on. In the downtown development framework, which Lee mentioned several times, and we did vote to approve it. I'm not sure if it's been approved by council or not, but just anecdotally, in that, where the Haas location is, the downtown development framework recommends a density of I believe 8 to 12 dwelling units per acre. On this particular site, the downtown development framework suggests medium residential density and starts at 12 and goes all the way up to 50 dwelling units per acre. So clearly there's a goal to try to move more density into this area. I did have a question about whether those structures were a 4th story or not. We heard from the planning department that they're not in their estimation. Therefore, it's hard for me to vote in such a way that says they are. Doesn't mean that couldn't be taken up in front of the BOA and the argument made there. The issue of transition between the north area of this development and 7th, I think, is one that can be examined further. But in my reading of the code, it's the transition between the new development and the neighborhood. And yes, there are some homes along the alley that it would be a shame, because these people were some of the first people to move into the area. But per the code, it's not that particular 1 or 2 homes, it's the neighborhood. And I think that Ben's point, in my mind, is well taken, that because of that 12-foot elevation difference from 7th to the alley, that when you look at neighborhood versus this development, it doesn't seem that it dwarfs it. Yes, it does dwarf the Rutledge's house and some of the smaller garage apartment units, and I feel very bad about Brian's views, but I just, per the code, don't know that I personally can find something here that tells me that this cannot be allowed. Anyway, that's what I'm wrestling with, and that's how I'm coming at it, and I'm willing to let anyone else comment on that.
I have a couple of observations that there would be probably a reasonable compromise between what everyone wants. Agreed, there should be a higher massing along 6th Street, a simple transition to the alley side, where those are the 2-story units, or 3-story units, as you call them, or vice versa, however that's said. But even that simple transition would accomplish the same density as you have now by putting the street wall on 6th, with which the code supports, and it makes a transition which the code supports. That deals with scale and character. There is definitely an argument for the character of the views being part of that, and without some effort to attempt to work on that, seems like an opportunity lost.
We specifically went with the 2-story units because you pointed out that had you looked out of your house, you would have seen a block wall if it was all 3 stories. And that was really specifically why we went to the 2 stories. Putting 2 stories in back and 3 stories in front, we think would change the entire look of what we're doing, and would just really block all of their views as well, in my opinion.
By looking at the massing that it is, I would probably suggest that the views of those on the north end of your development would be blocked anyways.
According to AG, they're not. We're just going off what they told us.
And then the idea of street walls, so there's no willingness to look at that simple compromise even?
Well, at this point in time, we have a contingency in place where if we kind of have to know either way, so we can move forward.
And then I also am very curious how the subdivision part, we talk about a couple of variances required. The mere fact that it is a subdivision that breaks it apart, adds another street, how is that interpreted as changing pattern and character?
Michael, you've explained this to me before. Did you want to mention how we view the subdivision of splitting up lots?
Well, first of all, during the presentation, Mr. Dedman indicated they're going to widen the drive out to 24, so they will meet that standard. The only thing they would not be meeting would be having the sidewalk, and they would still need a variance for not having that sidewalk. But it's basically like a driveway off of Francis to provide access to the garages of the units in the front row of the project. So.
And regarding the lot splits, that we make that a condition, and because that's not handled at our level, we just make that a condition, and if they are able to get it, they get it, and if they're not able to get it, then it's a condition, so they don't get approval.
Right. If they were not able to get a subdivision approved to create the individual lots, and it's a condition of the CA, then the CA would become null and void if they can't meet that condition.
And things that have not been talked about that I've definitely had concerns about is even with the Paseo case that we just heard, there are blank walls that was addressed and required. These are blank walls on virtually every unit on the west side of every unit. Why is that not addressable?
Well, I mean, they're pretty much doing it to themselves. I mean, it's number one, they wouldn't necessarily, those blank walls wouldn't necessarily be seen by anybody but residents in other units in the project. The units that are on the west end of the project that face Francis, I believe, do have windows that face Francis, so they're not blank. And essentially, they're zero lot line products, and I think that they would be required not to have openings on that wall because of the building code.
A question about the canopy on top. It seems like that's adding to the concern of the height. And was there any other consideration as to design of that or the necessity for that? It's a solid wall. It adds to the bulk.
Yeah, we try to ask ADG to come up with any way instead of doing that because it is a significant extra cost for us. But with the staircase going to the roof, they said there's no way for water not to, there's no good way to prevent water from leaking into the house long term if we don't put that canopy over the staircase.
It's open on two sides. Surely it's not to keep water out.
It's what, I'm sorry?
It's open on two sides.
Yes.
I mean, water can enter in.
Well, where the door is, it's in the back corner of that canopy.
Could there not be some improvement to the exterior so that it has the appearance of openness or some architectural feature to improve the look? I think it's the solidity, it's the...
The back side is actually open. It's wood slats. I don't know if it reflects in the images.
No, it does not.
I think what we're getting at is that
You have a better piece of information in your packet, hard copy, the elevations. The elevations are unfortunately not in this PowerPoint presentation. This is the best shot we have.
But the backside of it is what's slats. They're not solid.
I think the point that we're trying to make with that is that it has a lot more mass than it needs to have to shelter the stairway. And while I think it's an attractive component of the building, it is getting in the way of people's understanding of what's going on. The roof is not a floor or a story. The roof is the roof. People are up on the roof to look at the stars and look at the buildings, and there's no ordinance anywhere that says you can't get up on your own roof, and so it's really just the stair enclosure that is much larger than the stairway itself that people are focusing on. And that could easily be done, as was just suggested, in a way that was less obtrusive to the neighbors.
Well, this is Tyler with ADG. If I may let him speak on that. We're kind of taking their advice on.
I think ADG could solve it. It's a good design.
Is Scott still here, or is he?
Scott had to leave.
Yeah, Tyler, do you want to?
What was the question?
Well, the comment was part of the thing that is causing concern among the neighbors is when they look at it in some profiles, it appears to be another floor, and it's not. It's really a windscreen or a shelter that has got more mass to it than just the stairway enclosure. And if you could find a way to provide the same sort of shelter without creating that extra mass, it might help you all finding a compromise. And there were many other issues, but in terms of calling it a four-story building and you're creating a lot more of a barrier with that.
We would be willing to look into that. I think the problem at hand, though, isn't as much how ours appears. It's more so the view itself. And if we were to change the way it looked in any way, it's still going to be, to make it transparent so people can see through the building to see downtown. I don't know if that would be causing I don't think that the problem at hand is the views of downtown, and if they think that it's obstructing it, the idea of having the stairs go up and creating a landing there and keeping that sealed in, if we were to take that away, it would be a constructability issue of how water would come into it. But
You'd have to enclose the stairway, of course.
Correct, yeah.
But you're enclosing much more than the stairway.
So
currently,
we would be looking. We could look into, and kind of like what I said before, one of the previous ones. We could defer this, and we could possibly change and maybe, diminish the size of that if that's what's wanted. But we believe that having this being covered provides an amenity for basically the rooftops and increases, really, the enjoyment of the people that live in these units.
Yeah, nobody's arguing about that. I think that's fine. I think what I'm responding to is there's been 3 suggestions up here that maybe there's a way that you can arrive at some accommodations to some of the resistance in the neighborhood. And maybe that's something you don't want to do, but I think that was a good suggestion. I think that you're maybe missing an opportunity to
we understand that, but also
cut the resistance.
Also, still, the height of these units, they still are under the required height, which is 50 feet, so it still is within basically the guidelines. So that was another reason why we didn't think it would be an issue. So.
I want to thank you for pointing out that view. From the one in our packet, we couldn't see that the north side is predominantly a slatted material. I was under the impression that was solid, as was the west side, so thank you.
Looking at that elevation, that north side, I do appreciate being able to see that it's slatted. The north side elevation seems to be the smaller of the two, though. The west side elevation was the one that, to me, I question, why does it need to be quite as large and as obstructive of views as it is?
Some of that's also, you'll realize since the units are close together, that also provides a little bit of privacy to some of the neighbors below, just viewing downward to their units. So it just, and aesthetically on the west side, having a continuous vertical element run all the way up and go through, it's consistent with the concept. So that was another reason why we aesthetically chose to do that.
I still think it's a 4-story building. We're using references. Steve's house is considered a 3-story building with a basement, and he has nothing but a roof deck on top with the access to the roof deck. My house is considered a 3-story with a basement, and I have simple access to the roof. These are actually about 9 feet taller than either mine or Steve's house, just to give a sense of it.
If there is a significant issue about whether that is or not a story, one way to resolve the impasse would be to require a variance for that. Would that, good idea, bad idea? Okay.
A small thing to note is some of the units just north of this are under the 30-foot requirement. So, and I believe that Lee's home was 26 foot 9 feet tall. So his actually would have also required a variance to be shorter than the guideline.
You're misinterpreting the code. It's 2 stories or 30 feet.
Okay.
So let me ask you, does it make sense to take a look at this, take a look at the rooftop structure and see if you can work on something that might be more amenable? And then also I would ask the residents that, is that even, I mean, if that's the one issue, does that address your concerns?
I certainly don't speak for everybody. My view is impacted probably the least, but I really like the idea of making that structure smaller. Most of the views are not south. Most of the views are southeast. So the slats on the north, you know, if you could make the whole thing smaller, that to me would make a big difference. But I don't presume to speak for everyone, but I would greatly appreciate an effort to make that smaller.
Okay, thanks, Lee.
And I would ask for strong consideration of everybody's problems, I suspect, would be resolved with the taller units on the front and the shorter units on the back. And it's still the same number of units.
Speaking personally, if I were to purchase a property here, I wouldn't want to live in a 2-story, directly behind a 3-story, the same way the other residents don't want to be in a single or 2-story behind 3 residents. It's basically replicating the problem that they're saying for the new buyers in the neighborhood.
So you're saying that people who already exist there, you would not want to live there because of this?
For me, it wouldn't bother me. For them, it bothers them a lot. We live practically behind Mason's house, and
The view issue obviously is a sensitive issue, but the problem is that we don't have any view shed language, and the city has looked at it, and when your house was up, you told us correctly, there's no view shed language in the OKC ordinances, and I know we've gotten together and talked about it a few times. It was in I think 2013, bill circulated that the neighborhood, this is something like we'd like to address. For whatever reason, it hasn't been addressed, maybe because it's too complex. My personal belief is that the reason this parcel is in the cottage district is because the city wanted there to be some height limits. It was not originally in the cottage district. The cottage district boundaries were changed and this was included. And because before it would have been DTD1 and there would have been no height limit at all. So the fact that there is at least some height limit is I think, a gesture towards some type of compromise. But the views, it pulls on my heartstrings. But in terms of the code, I just don't know how we view those.
It's still about transition.
I think that's a fair point. The transition between, I think that could be looked at a number of different ways. I think I would view it as maybe closer to how Ben is viewing it, but I think other commissioners have expressed an equally valid way of looking at it.
I have one quick comment, actually. And I'm remembering actually going back to our diagrams of height on the back and the front. Oh, going back to the height of putting two-story units on the, basically the back side and three-story on the front. It kind of goes into consideration of views for our units as well. If you put a two-story behind the three, you actually begin losing views of your own downtown from our units. So having basically each unit's, the two stories line up north and south, the three stories line up north and south, it kind of creates a view corridor for your own units to see downtown itself. So that's another thing. That's how our design played out as well. So
I wanted to ask, and obviously you wouldn't consider it because you probably aren't maximizing your return, but I think it might help the neighborhood if you altered it, if you changed the pattern, if you had the 3 stories second, so if you start with the 2-story, 3-story, 2-story, you would cut the 3 stories down to 3 rows, and you'd have 4 rows of 2. That would reduce the scale, in my mind, and keep that alternating pattern, which I agree. I don't agree with putting the 2 stories behind the 3, but change the pattern so that, and even from Francis, you'd have the lower scale adjacent to the street. I think it would be a better transition.
I'd have to go back and run numbers, but going down and losing more square footage would affect our pro forma dramatically, where it wouldn't even be feasible at that point. Reduced it as significant as we could, coming down 2 stories on those units.
One of the issues I have here, and I recognize that we don't have very clear guidance from the code itself, especially when it comes to views and sightlines and things, but based on what you're saying, it's not practical, it's not really an option to put the 2 stories in the back and the 3 stories in the front, because it dramatically reduces the value of the 2 stories that are going to be in back because they have no view. And you have lined it up and gone through great pains so that the ones in the back do have a view to increase value of those, which is telling me that you recognize everybody that I've heard from today is recognizing that the view is inherently part of the value of these properties, both these properties and the ones on 7th. So even though we have nothing specific in the code talking about views, the logic dictates that what y'all are doing is potentially going to impact the value of the properties on 7th that are going to be impacted by this, and that gives me pause.
We don't think it's going to decrease the value at all. It's going to decrease the preference, in our opinion. We're getting $280 per square foot for these homes that we built prior to this, and we believe it's raising the value of the neighborhood tremendously. So whether we had 2 or 3 stories in front, we still strongly believe they would all sell. It's just a matter of preference.
So, by that logic, if the views are not what's adding to the value, then you could put the 2 stories all in the back and the 3 stories all in the front, and it wouldn't make a difference.
It would make a difference for us than what we think people would want for our clients.
And your clients would be different than the people on 7th, how?
They're just new buyers.
Okay.
I think I would just add that setting a precedent that you could not build on your own property when you're building within height requirements to protect someone else's view is a very dangerous precedent in the other direction. And I think that goes against the code that's on the books.
Yeah, I kind of agree with that, because I think there is this notion of equanimity and well, you're taking someone's view away, and that just isn't right. And from an ethical perspective or whatever, who knows what the answer is, but we can't guess at that. All we can go by is the code, and if there's no language in the code to protect views, then to fulfill our obligation here, we cannot inject personal preference or opinion. We've got to go by the code, which is why I'm struggling with a lot of the issues here, because clearly people are invested. There's a lot of emotion tied up, myself as well. These people came and, Brian pretty much created the modern architecture movement in the Cottage District. But still, per the code, I'm at a loss as to what about this project I can mandate to be otherwise. I think Donna may have had a good area for exploration, which is it possible to make the numbers pencil out the same way to get the square feet you need, but to work in some type of a transition, alternating the 2 and 3 stories or configuring them in maybe a creative way that would make the numbers work out, but that would also enhance the transitional aspect off of Francis and off of the alley. That might be a productive exercise.
I honestly believe that staggering units, changing things, views are important to all the neighbors. If we were to stagger the units and put a 2-story on the northwest unit and then go 2, 3, 2, 3, you're then increasing possibly Brian's view of their home, but you're then putting a 3-story directly in front of the home just north of this development and blocking every single view they have. So there's a lot of different layouts, there's a lot of different neighbors, and everyone will have their beliefs on a lot of different issues, but getting a large group of people together with lots of different opinions, it's become difficult for our client. So we can work with them more, but it's been tried, and it's ultimately, from what we've gathered, is frustration on both ends. And instead of, I don't know, I feel like more destruction can happen from something like this than actually constructive. But that's just, it could be a dangerous thing to mess with. I don't know if everyone's going to get what they want. no matter what, so.
Yeah, my issue is that we're not, generally when we defer something or continue it rather, there's a specific something or other we want to have worked out, and the conditions have to be right. And I think Lee mentioned a great example with his house and Dennis and some other people there, and they were able to come together. I would be personally disinclined to continue this and just to take up some more time and hope that something comes together if we don't think the ingredients are there. Maybe, and I'll just toss this out, maybe the best thing to do is take a vote and just see what happens, and maybe it's resolved or maybe it has to go to the BOA. I don't know, but I feel that we do have a responsibility to take some type of action that we think is moving this forward, moving the process forward so they're actually accomplishing something here.
Can I ask, based on the significant effort made by the speaker on the scale and the transition, with your experience with the code, I'm asking, does this play into any element of the code that we need to address? The fact that the scale is significantly different from the neighboring developments.
Well, in my personal opinion, the scale survey, I think it's a bit of an apples to oranges comparison, because this housing type is you're splitting the lot, you're wanting to build a single family detached that you can sell fee simple, rather than doing a multifamily, which is also allowed in the cottage district per the code. And I think that housing type that people sometimes prefer because you're not sharing a wall and you're able to own it fee simple as opposed to some type of a condominium ownership structure. I think that because that's how they're organizing this, I think it's a little bit apples to oranges. Also, the fact that it's on an arterial as opposed to a local street, I feel it's different. The density, I think I've spoken about, they're on 802 Northwest 8th, that there are 4 units there now on a 50 by 140-foot lot that is a density of 25 units per acre. It used to be 8 units, which is 50. Used to actually be 8 plus because they had an outbuilding. And that's a collector street, Chartel. So I think the precedent is there for density. The downtown development framework clearly wants to push density down to 6th. The transition we've spoken about, that's I think maybe something of a question mark. Although the way I read the code is similar to the way Ben reads it, which makes that less clear cut if we're not talking just about several of the houses on the alley. The views, I don't believe we can address because I don't think the code allows us to. So that's kind of how I come down on those. Lee, please.
Not to belabor this anymore, but I just wanted to make the point that the survey, the top line there is the entire district. It's not just my alley or the block. And if you compare what they're proposing here, which is what the Haws were proposing and was rejected for being out of context and out of character, I think you have some leeway in the guidelines, out of context, out of character, out of scale, when you look at this compared to the whole neighborhood. That top row, residents as a percentage of lot size, 34% throughout the whole district, not just my block, not just the alley. They're at 135%. That is out of scale, and there's a specific guideline about it has to incorporate the scale of the traditional block pattern, scale and proportions.
Yeah, one of the development pattern guidelines within DTD1 is new development occurring adjacent to existing and stable residential neighborhoods, which this is, should provide appropriate transitions that respect the scale, character, and architectural detailing of the adjacent. Transition is very important in that.
I don't disagree. And if you're driving down the alley past the Rutledge's home, past the People's Garage, there is a clear mismatch. I admit that. If you're driving down 7th and looking out past the people's residence out over to where the development's going to be, the development is not looming over you. So the way I interpret that is if you're at one particular point on the alley, yes, there's a transitional issue. If you're up on the next cross street, I don't think you read a transitional issue at all.
I think it's a very important point, because from the garage apartments on the alley, these are much taller, but from the homes on 7th, they're not. I think it's pretty important.
I also think it's important, one thing that you pointed out earlier, George, this particular piece of property was not originally within the cottage district, and came within the cottage district so that there can't be a high-rise building or something.
That's my working hypothesis.
Right, okay, but it came within the cottage district to almost force there to be some sort of transition where there is a height requirement, and this is, not everybody likes the transition, not everybody likes the compromise here, but this is entering into, this is the gateway into a residential neighborhood. This could very easily have been a commercially developed piece of property that would have been even more stark of a transition or lack of transition between the residential and 6th Street, the arterial.
If I may comment on that, Valere has already approached us on purchasing the property from us. So if not this, it will very likely be a very large commercial building.
If I can go back to what you were saying a minute ago, George, typically when we continue something, it's for a specific issue, and the only real specific issue I've seen from this that there's been any meaningful ability to compromise on is the rooftop, the mass of the rooftop access, the westbound, the west-facing or the north-facing walls on the rooftop access. I don't know if that's something that's going to be significant enough to, it obviously won't make everyone happy, but it may improve the project for some people. If that's something that we could, I'd like to see that continued and at least look at maybe a redesign of that top floor or that rooftop access structure.
I still think that's a story. So.
Okay, so if we think it's a story, what do we do? Do we deny it because we say it's 4 stories? Or do we say we're not sure, or we say it is, but we say it is a story, but we pass everything else and require a variance? What's your approach? My concern is this, is that if we say we make the call, it's a story, and we deny based on that, in effect, we're kind of doing the Board of Adjustment's job for them, that they're the ones who make those calls. It almost seems like we should approve, but require a variance for that. No, you disagree, I can tell by your eyes. Okay, what's your point of view?
What does Mike say? Because the city representative said it wasn't.
Jeff, I let Jeff go because I thought he was pretty much done.
That's fine, Michael. I put it to Jeff, and I said, from the planning department's perspective, is this a story? And he said, no. So therefore, it almost seems that if that is disagreed with and this is approved, that the residents should appeal and take it to the BOA and say that call was wrong.
Okay, it is the difference between building code, which Jeff rules on, and zoning code. Our zoning code has it clearly defined.
What did, I didn't hear Brian's argument for that being a story. What's that? What are you?
Definition in the zoning code is from floor to ceiling.
Right.
It's that simple.
Okay, but if you had for instance, if you had an elevator penthouse, or if you had a stairway that went up to the roof,
The zoning code specifically addresses that.
would you say that it does?
The zoning code specifically excludes, it was in Lee's presentation, but elevator, penthouses, mechanical, whatever.
Here, I'll go ahead. I'll read it.
Penthouse?
Stair is not excluded.
If I could read it, it's this: chimneys, cooling towers, elevator shafts, bulkheads, broadcasting and receiving antennas, towers, fire towers, tanks, water towers, ornamental towers, and spires, wireless towers, and necessary mechanical appurtenances shall be excluded from the measured height of a building, as long as they don't go more than 15 feet beyond the permitted height.
And it doesn't exclude roof, deck coverings, or stairs.
To add and maybe play devil's advocate, they could build 3 stories and have 15-foot ceilings and be a taller structure than this, and stick a cell phone tower on the roof and be within code. I mean, they could build taller stories to the point of maybe an office building or something could have 3 stories and be 50-foot tall.
Well, there's a height restriction, too.
Yeah, it's 50 foot. Like, so my point would be that something could be built here much more massive and taller than this.
What Ben is saying is you could have 50 feet plus 15 feet for 65 total feet. The top 15 feet wouldn't be counted per the code.
That's not what he's saying.
I mean, it could be 3 15-foot stories, floor to ceiling with your joists, and it could be 50 feet and be 3 stories at 50 feet tall. So within the height limitations, it could be a taller structure than this would be allowed, because these have a shorter ceiling height.
I mean,
I'm just adding.
I don't, if the expert from the planning department has weighed in and said this is not a story, unless I'm going to be hard pressed to go against that.
Jeff is from Development Services, but we had the same conversation with J.J. Chambliss, who is also in Development Services, but is primarily the guru of the zoning code, and he had the same conclusion that Jeff did. They got together and talked about it.
Okay.
So, I was going to have J.J. come, but it ended up being Jeff instead. So, but they're both Development Services, and we rely on them for interpretation of the code, because a lot of times when we go through approval of CAs and it actually gets the building permit, they'll catch us on something that we didn't catch at the CA level and say, we're pointing to this definition and you didn't meet it, and so you got to go back and fix that or come back and get a variance for it or whatever it might be. In this case, we knew the day that the application came in the door that we were going to have an issue with that roof terrace and the covered area of it, and we went right to them within the first week that we had the application to get that sorted out. So.
Okay, thank you, Michael. Thanks for that background.
The other thing I want to point out is that while the covered portion of the roof terrace appears to be one of the primary issues of the people that are in opposition to the project, clearly the density is also another issue that they had a lot of concern about. So I'm not sure that just continuing in this to solve the roof terrace mass issue is going to assuage everybody's concerns, because there's still the density issue out there as well.
Well, I don't know that we have much of a leg to stand on other than to move forward.
There is, if anyone would care to make a motion, there is a recommended motion in your packet regarding adding the condition of the subdividing the lots. Actually, I think would need to make two motions. The staff recommended two. One, approval with a condition, and then second, recommendation to the BOA for, do we still need that, or do we need the sidewalk?
You still need it for the sidewalk.
Okay, so provide a recommendation to the BOA for that, to a variance for that, not having a sidewalk on that private alley.
I'm pretty conflicted about it, but just for the sake of getting a vote, I move that we have the condition that it's conditional on the replatting, and on the variance for the sidewalk.
Should we make two separate motions? Yeah, let's.
Yes.
So one motion should be to approve the application with the condition that the applicant obtain approval for subdivision that plats an individual lot for each of the 14 dwelling units.
That was beautiful.
I was reading it. Can you remember it? Or you care, I can pass this down if you want to.
Oh, you were reading it. All right.
No, I think we have to actually read it in.
Okay, so you want me to reread this paragraph?
If that's what you want to move.
Approve the application on the, I move we approve the application on the basis that the project meets the regulations and guidelines of the Downtown Design District zoning ordinance as referenced in Section C of the staff report, and that the applicant shall, is this part of the first, provided that the applicant obtains approval of the subdivision that replats the property into individual lots for each of the 14 dwelling units.
All right, we have a motion by Robeson. Do we have a second?
So moved.
Okay, second by Cervantes. All in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed? Okay, the motion carries. There's approval. Now, the second motion that we need is a recommendation to the Board of Adjustment for the variance for that private alley without a sidewalk.
Make a motion to make a recommendation to approve the Board of Adjustment with the variance of the sidewalk.
Okay, that's a motion by Sellers. Do we have a second? Second by Guillory. All in favor say aye. 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 Any opposed? Okay, that motion carries as well. Thank you. Anyone who is here for this case, thanks for your attendance. Feel free to go. There's no reason for you to stay the rest of the meeting unless you want to. Okay, communications, 8A, presentation for the alley project in the Plaza District.
Hello, my name is Dylan Bradway. My address is 1735 Northwest 13th in Oklahoma City. The idea behind the Plaza Alley project is to create a rotating outdoor art exhibition in the Plaza District. We feel like we have a unique opportunity here to activate an underutilized private alley in the Plaza District by transforming it into an outdoor art exhibition to feature rotating work from a variety of artists and versed in the creation of murals and public street art. The surrounding community would benefit from this by added cultural attraction, as well as a drive to tourism and identifying the area as an arts district. The basic idea is to create a permission-based, curated outdoor public exhibition space, open to the public for walking and viewing, the opportunity for large rotating art to be displayed and executed by local and traveling artists, increasing tourism to the district, and again, helping to define the district as an arts district. Heading into the future, I've been a part of the district for 7 years with the creation of DNA galleries and living in the district, and headed into the future, I feel like this helps to solidify that district as an arts-oriented area. The curation and management of the area, or of the project, would be spearheaded by myself and another artist, Chris Canali. We would create a collective of artists to help curate, manage, and maintain the outdoor exhibition space for a period of 12 months to 24 months as a pilot project, with the help of the property owner, Steve Mason, with Mason Realty and Plaza 1529 LLC. Chris and I are both artists, graphic designers, mural artists, and we have connections with a lot of national and local artists. We're seeking recommendation, and I've already done an informal presentation to Arts Commission on this. We're hoping to submit our application to them July 1st. So we're trying to get some feedback and get the ball rolling. But we're seeking recommendation from the Arts Commission and or approval from the Urban Design Commission to establish this curatorial body to allow for the rotating artwork rather than a static mural. And I'm not sure, but we are open to a variance if we needed to pursue that. We just don't know of the nature of what that variance might be, and needed some suggestions in that regard. Again, curation would be within the mural guidelines of aesthetics, positivity, thought-provoking, inspirational, and no racist, sexist, profane, or explicit imagery. Artwork would remain kid-friendly, and any violations of that would be swiftly removed. Currently, we're working with the Plaza District Association to establish a plan for added support and involvement by them, including potential grant opportunities for the artist and site management of the area. And actually, I just received a letter from the director of the Plaza District for recommendation of the project, and Chris and I's involvement in the curation of it. The location, as you can see in the document, is the property at Northwest 16th in Indiana, owned by Steve Mason here. It's the back alley behind, which is a private alley. The yellow areas in the image show the proposed areas. For a curatorial plan, we hope to call for entries and invitation by artists, or invitation to artists, as well as signage on location to create a buzz for involvement in the area. And that would allow people to submit to the collective for consideration. That curation would happen in that process. And during that, the artist would need to sign a VERA waiver, similar to the mural projects around the city, to release their basic ownership of the property. And along with that, we hope to establish rules and regulations for the permission of the artist to paint in this area. Basically, shown in the image as well are the two high-profile spots shown in green. Those are the east and west walls of this property. We would reserve those for longer use or longer stays of the artwork for more like profound proposals, more engaging imagery. And a lighting study is currently being performed by Ken Fitzsimmons to help light the alley and bring more life to that area, creating a safer, more utilized space in the district. Currently it's fairly dark at night, and hardly anybody goes back there currently. A management plan we're working on for contractual agreements through the property owner and the curators would establish designated areas through signage, directional signage, and designated areas as well as prohibited areas for the artists. This would mark off sections for people to paint and hopefully keep them from painting on anything else. Along with that, we plan to manage the area by patrolling and keeping an eye as well as documenting the area, and that would allow us a chance to take down anything that would be seen negatively. And along with that, the signage in the area would designate hours, how to get permission and private property declaration, as well as contact information for the collective that we hope to establish. Any artist identified as working outside of the designated areas or operational hours would have their permission revoked. Illegal graffiti abatement would also be monitored by the collective and taken care of during the length of the project. The special events section, to kick off this project, we would hope to apply for the public event on private property special event permit to hold these for live viewing by the public to watch artists create during Live on the Plaza, Second Friday events that take place every month, as well as potential kickoff event during the Plaza District Festival. We're shooting for the September 26, 2015, but we are just trying to get the ball rolling and see if we can pull that off. And again, the special events would include live music. The current images of the alley, again, show that east and west wall, the two prominent walls, as well as the alley behind with the less prominent areas that you cannot see from the street. And in the back on the last page, we've got a couple of examples of some national projects, one in San Francisco and Clarion Alley, and as well as one in Miami, the Wynwood Walls, and those are both very successful, similar projects, all created and curated by a collective as well, and they've been thriving for a long amount of time. So I just wanted to put this out there and see if we had any feedback or recommendations from the commission on how to proceed.
Okay. I think it's a great idea. My question was, even though it's a private alley, it sounds like there might be light and noise. Does it make sense to talk to the neighbors? Have you already done that? Is that something?
That's part of our plan, is to talk. There is a residential area behind. They're apartments, and there is a fence in between the wall of the alley and their residence. So only from I think the top floor might you see the wall. But yes, that was part of our plan, was to approach them and see if there was any kickback or negative response from them. We definitely don't want to disrupt anybody in the district. We've had lots of positive response from all the business owners as well as the Plaza District Association itself, but the residents have not been approached just yet. So.
Okay, thanks.
And we are meeting with Lyric tomorrow.
Okay.
Yeah, because they have the parallel wall to that east side alley, and we want to make sure that they're happy.
I was going to say, I think it's a really cool project. From UDC, are you looking for approval to have it rotate, so every time they do it, they don't get approval?
That's the key thing, because talking with Robbie Kinzel, at first we didn't want to approach it as a mural due to that fact, and now we're kind of thinking it just has to be approached as a mural because of the nature of the application to the building. But yeah, the rotating, like, curatorial part of it would be where we want some sort of guidance or approval in that respect. So
just to understand, approaching it as a mural, what's the implications of that?
Approaching it as a mural, we have to get it approved every time there's an image involved. Approach the Arts Commission and then the UDC every time.
That is the way you have to do it?
That's the process for every mural we did one in the 9th Street area, and I've done one in the Plaza District, and that's the process every time. I know there's talks about different definitions for the mural, or code for the mural, in the works for the Arts Master Plan in that respect, but that's kind of where we're trying to find another way around it, or some sort of approval to allow for a different curatorial body for it. Because right now it's Arts Commission recommends it to you guys, and then we have approval after the fact from you just to get it to get the project completed.
And the idea would be to maybe have it changed monthly with Plaza, or every few months?
Monthly, that
might be a lot. It might be.
Yeah, I mean, it could be even bi-weekly. It just depends on the amount of support we get from the artist and how eager they are to come and do the project. Hopefully that east and west end we would keep up for a month to 2 months, so it wouldn't rotate as often, but the back alley could be more of an experimental, even collaborative area, because some of the artists might even work on other people's work, and it could grow over time. And that's what we see in a lot of these other areas, like in the Clarion Alley and the Wynwood Walls in Miami. It's just exploded over time as the place to go paint. Artists that come through the city, I know from experience, we've had a lot of artists come through the city and be like, where do I go paint? Because it's just, that happens in multiple other cities around the country. There's just free walls, basically, that people have access to. The curation part definitely combats any of the negative aspects of like graffiti art or defacing property, and that's what we're hoping to get around by utilizing this alley as kind of a hub for that and attracting people to allow them to use that.
Do we need to research language, and what do you think? Because it's kind of,
there's no actual application or presentation.
This is just informational only. So I think staff will tell us what we have to do, but basically they're trying to take our temperature. Do we think this is a good idea?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a good idea.
We do plan to submit an application.
Okay.
Is the process, as you're currently experiencing it, you go through the Art Commission and then you go where?
To you.
Right now?
Mm-hmm. Especially in that we're in the urban design district, so we have to go through urban design.
Okay, and would you still be going through the Arts Commission?
Yes, we plan to submit that application July 1st.
Okay.
And that's, again, they are meant for a recommendation board. They can't, I don't think they actually approve anything but recommending to you, to your board.
Yeah, well, in some of these areas, there's been large issues over murals and stuff, and we had that experience. And it seems to me like it would be good if we could, does it take any kind of an ordinance revision or anything to have something that's just a curated, rotating outdoor mural? Can we just get that set up so they don't?
Well, right now, it's just a standard certificate of approval process.
Yeah.
And they would file an application for us with that.
So they'd just have to keep doing that?
Well, I mean,
couldn't you do that?
It depends on whether or not the commission is amenable to, if you're in favor of the concept and you're comfortable with the Arts Commission being the one to call the shots on what goes up there, then it's a possibility that we could just do the one CA, perhaps put a time limit on it.
Yeah.
And then apply again.
There's a lot of options to consider, and then, at the end of the time period, gets painted back to the original or something like that.
Yeah, I think getting us out of the process is a good step. So maybe give them a year, and then we just see how it's been going, and we take it from there.
Yeah, I'm good with that.
I like the idea, and in fact, when you're done with the Plaza District, come see Capitol Hill, and I got the prime wall. We'd love to.
We've had some people approach us, actually, so.
Yeah. No, I think it's great. Encourage the arts and streamline the process. I think it's it's difficult. It's time-consuming the way it is. This is something we want to encourage, and let's find a way to make it happen in a controlled manner. I think you're doing a great job taking those steps, and it should be good for the city.
I appreciate that.
I have a couple questions. Is the alley going to be gated, or is it going to be open to the public at all times?
Currently, we propose to keep it open, but have some sort of private property signage stressing that there's some sort of curfew, but I'm not sure. Again, that's where I'm seeking some sort of guidance. In other areas, like Wynwood, there is a gate, but it's open, and that's got a private property, so once you pass that line, you're on private property, so if you're seen as defacing or causing a problem back there, you're technically trespassing.
Will there be access to the alley from any of the rear doors, rear exits of any of the businesses in those buildings?
They currently do have access, correct, Steve?
They use the back door for their trash and hauling out grease and stuff.
Would customers or patrons be able to go in and out from, it'd be up to the
I don't think any
tenant?
of the businesses allow their patrons go back.
And they have a door.
And I guess what I'm getting at is, will there be food and beverage access to this back alley, and would there need to be either more consideration to the opinions of the adjoining neighbors and/or gates at either end to where you can have alcohol?
Well, regarding the alcohol, the standard alcohol rules will apply. Currently, we aren't planning to apply for an alcohol permit for the alley.
Or any type of patio access for any of the restaurants or anything. Because currently none of those, they all use their storefront, not the back. The back of the house is their kitchen, their storage, their service, usually their restrooms maybe.
Yeah.
And Dylan's down there with DNA, and I'm down there also, and we're very sensitive. We don't want to set up competing businesses to sell food and alcohol.
Right.
Yeah, I'm just kind of picturing like Urban Wine Works or something, customers going out there with a glass of wine, which would be a pleasant thing to do. You go look at the art. I love the project.
I think that's where, if possible, when we apply for public event permits, that would be considered for those situations.
Yeah, to follow through your question, like Urban Wine Works and Empire, out on their front sidewalk, you can sit on a patio. So I would presume whatever those rules are on the front patio would apply in the back.
Right. And that's why I was questioning about the neighbors and, what impact it may have on those apartments.
Well, the neighbors, it doesn't matter. As long as it's within code.
And there's no point of access through the fence to the back neighbors beyond maybe a hole in the fence that might need repair. But
And don't get me wrong, I think it's going to be a great addition. I'm just curious about the logistics.
right, and I was definitely coming to you guys for any type of guidance or hiccups that we might come across. So.
I don't, other than talking to the neighbors, I think everyone's going to be cheering with both hands, so I don't foresee anything. And again, I think we're all kind of in agreement that you should get us out of the process. We shouldn't be curating any of this stuff, so.
Okay.
Yeah. Cool. Good.
Great. Thank you so much.
Okay, thanks. All right. 8B, Administrative Approval Report.
Yeah, we have 5 items on this part of the agenda that have been approved over the past month or so. Most significant among them is some revisions. Some of them significant to the Terra Theater, but they all met the threshold of administrative approval, so that approval's been granted already. The rest of it is pretty straightforward. Some sign and walking cooler being relocated, so on and so forth.
Okay, thank you. And the BOA, we see that.
Yeah, on the Lynn residence, the hearing to consider the denial of the EDC on the Lynn residence was continued from June 4th to the July 2nd meeting. And then the demolition ordinance at the Planning Commission is being was continued on May 28th by the Urban Development Committee. And as far as I know, I don't think we have a new date set for that to go back to Planning Commission at this point in time. So,
And any update on this, on the downtown development framework, the progress that's making?
you know, I'm involved with that tangentially because they're making Bricktown the guinea pig for part of it, and we're in the midst of a code update for Bricktown. So I'm working with the committee that's handling that. We actually had a meeting scheduled yesterday that got canceled because some people were unavailable. I don't know what the time frame is for getting that moving forward through the Planning Commission and the City Council, but I do know that we're incorporating and integrating input from the framework into our updated guidelines and development regulations for Bricktown and hoping to take that to them in September. So my guess is it'll go back to the Commission and the Council sometime in the fall of this year, I hope. But
Okay, that makes sense. Okay, any other comments from staff?
no, we don't have anything else.
Okay, any comments from commission members?
I have a quick question. It's going back months, and I don't want to get into weeds on this because we've been here for a while. There was a project, not a project actually, it was a structure that was put up in a parking lot on the corner of 23rd and Robinson, not approved. They were supposed to take it down. It's still sitting there. It has a for sale sign on it. What happens? I mean, are they getting fined or penalized or?
Yes, they are. It's a pretty typical problem that we have with the code enforcement process and the courts and so on and so forth. It really comes down to whether our fee structure for fines is substantial enough to deter people from continuing to do things. I've had visions in my head of driving a 4x4 down 23rd and just happening to go a little astray and take care of the problem. But it is very frustrating.
Okay.
Okay, thanks, Matt. I was wondering about that myself. Any other comments, questions? Okay, the next meeting date is in the agenda. If there are no objections, we will consider ourselves adjourned by unanimous consent. Thank you.